The following is a PragProg Hero's Journey with Brian Hogan, recorded in January 2020, presented by the Pragmatic Bookshelf. Home of timely, practical books on classic and cutting-edge tech topics. Find us online at pragprog.com and everywhere the finest tech books are sold.
Hi everybody and welcome to a PragProg Hero's Journey. Today we're sitting down with Brian Hogan, author, editor, software developer, instructor, and so much more. Thank you so much for joining us today, Brian, and for fitting us into your incredibly busy schedule. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's jump right in. If I'm not mistaken, I think the very first tech book you ever wrote was Web Design for Developers way back in 2010. What can you tell us about that?
So there's an interesting story behind that one because it actually goes back even farther. Right around 2005, I met Bruce Tate. He came to do some Java consulting where I was working. And we kind of got to know each other through his consulting engagement. And he learned that I was doing some side projects out in PHP and things like that. And he's like, for the stuff that you're doing, you should check out this Ruby on Rails thing. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, you really got to check it out. And he sort of, nudged me into it. And I did. And I really loved it. But we were a Windows infrastructure where I was working at the time, and Rails didn't really play well on Windows. I figured it out. I figured out how to make it work in our Windows environment. And I blogged about it and ended up getting reposted by the official Ruby on Rails blog back in 2006, I think. And it was like the end of the day, I got an email from Bruce who's like, hey, I'm working with some other folks on this book on deploying Rails applications for Pragmatic Bookshelf. And he said, would you contribute a chapter of that to our book? And so I did. I wrote one chapter. Actually, my first publication was that for Pragmatic Bookshelf. It was this old deploying Rails applications book where I was listed as, I got my name on the cover. That's kind of where it started. And I had this idea for how can I use the HTML and CSS and graphic design stuff that I learned when I was in college and I was doing it at my day job. How could I use that to help developers understand the process of design better? And so just as a goof, I'm like, well, I already know the Prag's writing style now. Let me submit my own thing. And they were very enthusiastic and they were very kind and let me do it. And they paired me up with a great development editor, Daniel Steinberg. Just a wonderful person. I learned so much from him. Unfortunately, that book took a long time to write and it was my first book, and I'm proud of it for what it was. But the world was changing so fast, and it didn't end up being what I really hoped it would be. But despite it taking a long time, they were kind enough to let me come back and write the HTML5 book too. So that was nice.
So then why go from I contributed a chapter with some co-authors to I think I'm going to write my own entire book now?
Because this is something I really believed in. I was spending so much of my time showing developers how to make things work for readability. I worked on a fairly large website for the university that I worked at, and so we were focused on all kinds of things from readability to accessibility to content design, all those kinds of things. And I spent so much of my time with the developers talking about those concepts that I had enough material for a book. And it was, I'm getting tired of saying this stuff. Can I just hand them a book? Maybe that was one of my ideas. Can I just hand them this book instead? There are a lot of people who really liked it. One of the biggest criticisms that it got at the time was that it was, it didn't look like the examples that were in the book didn't look flashy enough for people, because and it was sort of intentional. I picked some boring colors because the book wasn't really about how to pick. It was about how to pick the right colors that were right for you. And the example that we were using, it wasn't probably the best example, but it was an example that was, it was an example where I was trying to be thoughtful about who would be reading the book. I didn't want to pick something that was like video games that was overly focused on one audience or something else focused on other audience. So I picked, let's make a recipe website. And so you end up with these very, natural tones. And from the time that I had started writing the book to the time that we published the book, web design trends drastically changed. And so the book shifted and just kind of looked out of date. And that was sort of a big criticism. But the folks that were nice enough to look beyond that and look at the paragraphs where I said, I'm picking these colors and I'm making these choices, but you should pick the choices that are right for you. And here's how to pick colors. Here's how to choose fonts, those kinds of things. I have some really nice notes from people that I've saved over the years. I have a folder of things nice people say, because people say sometimes they say some not nice things, and the equation that I figured out with some other authors is that it takes like 5 nice things to counteract 1 negative thing. So you get some negative feedback on something, you need like 5 nice things to make up for that. But I have some nice notes from people who said really nice things about what they learned from that book and how it really improved the way they approach design, the design of their applications and the design of their sites.
Were you worried at all about the proposal process, or by the time you were doing your own book, was it like, well, I kind of know how this works and these people all know me?
I had done my proposal back in 2006. It was much of a less stringent process than it is now for publishing a book. It was really, hey, what's your idea? Send it to us. And I think my proposal might have been like, I sent in some sample stuff that I'd written for a workshop on Adobe Photoshop that I was going to include in the book. And I think I sent like a 1-pager of here's what I want to write about. Here's what I'm proposing for my table of contents in the flow. And I got to go at the end of the day, I got like a 1-sentence message from Andy Hunt saying, yeah, sounds good. it was very different than it is now. It was sort of, again, it's that being at the right place at the right time.
But you didn't know that, or did you? You didn't know that it was.
I didn't know that. I just they had a write for us page.
Yeah.
And so I just followed the directions on the write for us page like they have now. They just weren't nearly as involved as they are now. I mean, it was sort of it required so little effort on my part, to be perfectly honest, that I sort of didn't expect that I would even get a yes.
I haven't really talked with too many authors that had that many co-authors, unless it was like an anthology, right? It was we're just going to pull a chapter, someone else will put it all together. And I know that a lot of authors struggle even to do a book with 2 authors co-authoring. You work with so many people. What kind of challenges are there when you're trying to get that many people to cohesively write a book together?
There are a lot of challenges, and we skirted most of them because we did a recipes format. So we didn't have to have things that depended on other people. So each of the chapters is sort of independent. There were very few places where one chapter built on another. And so we kind of put everything into a Trello board and said, all right, y'all pick the ones that are your area of expertise. That's what you're working on. And then I just did the polished pass on all of them to just kind of get the voice. But these are people that I've worked with for a long time. These are people who worked with me, physically in the same place a lot of times. 3 of them I taught how to program. I taught how to code when they were students. So it's a bit of a cheat because there's a natural alignment in our voice, in our approach, and things like that. When you're taught by a teacher, then you teach the same way your teacher taught, and you sort of carry that through. So it's a bit of a cheat. It's an anomaly. It's not really something that's easily reproducible.
So some of these people were your former students and stuff. I wonder what that must have been like for them, that their former teacher and now friend is coming to them.
No, it was they were really excited to do it. I was excited to have them do it because, again, these are people, like, let's say I had to go strike out on my own to start something. These are the people that I would reach out to first and say, come work with me. These are people that I absolutely trust.
Yeah.
Implicitly, anything that they tell me, it's the truth. I would go to bat for them in a heartbeat, and then I know they'd go to bat for me in a heartbeat. So we were all like totally on board with doing it, and they were more along the lines looking to me for guidance on, well, is this, how should I explain this? Like, yeah, you got it. For me, one of the things that that drives me is helping other people get better at things. I really enjoy that. That's why I like editing books. It's why I like working with authors. It's why I like managing teams of people. It's why I like teaching. I get to do things through others, and I get to, we kind of amplify success. If you teach an author to write, they'll write something, and even if they don't write for you again, they'll go write something for other people, and they will have a profound impact on all of the other people that's reading their material. And that's pretty cool, because I can look at the code that, say, like my friend Chris Johnson writes. I can look at his code, and I can see little traces of like me in that code. And that's kind of neat. But but it's still his work. It's a lot like, if you look back at like the great composers, you can see how the composers, a lot of the great composers would learn music by transcribing the previous compositions of others. And so you can trace the compositional lineage through the ages of this person was clearly inspired by this person. This person was clearly inspired by this, but you can trace that down. But that's neat because now, Chris Johnson went on to go teach in the classroom as well. He went on to teach a whole other generation of software developers. And I like to think that I was able to help him get started on that journey, by working on this book with me. He was able to discover, I can teach people how to do this stuff too. And he did. And now there are a whole bunch of new people who are successful because of the work that he's done.
Yeah.
And hopefully those people will pay it forward as well.
Let's go back to web design for developers then, because that is now the first book that you're doing on your own. You send this in, like you said, a much easier proposals process. PragProg writes back and said, yeah, let's do the contract. You have the contract in hand, you're ready to go. Would you say it all went like you expected, or were there any surprises about writing a book on your own when you went to tackle that one?
Everything was a surprise. That book took 3 years to write. That book took 3 years to write, and I actually had a different developmental editor on that book when it started for the first year and a half or so.
Oh, wow.
And we just didn't make any progress. We just kind of running in circles, and I didn't know what I was doing. There were a lot of things that I knew how to do, but I didn't know how to do them in a book. Like I didn't know how to. I had to make a ton of graphics myself. I sort of assumed that I would have help with graphics, and so no, I had to make them myself. And I can do that. I did a lot of that when I was in college, but it's time consuming. It's time consuming to do it, and then ensure consistency. And this is a book that's needs a lot of consistency. And so there was an awful lot of writing and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting and redoing images and redoing diagrams and redoing all that stuff. Because I didn't really have any guidance for a little while, and I got some guy when I got a new DE when the previous DE left to go work on something else. Daniel joined in, and if you've ever read any of his books or have been privileged enough to learn from him, he's in that category of master instructor. He is a master instructor. He's the kind of instructor that you want to be. He's patient, he's kind, he's encouraging, but he also is, he's clear. This is hard. His famous phrase is this is hard, but you can do it. You're smart, you can do this. And he was very helpful, and he took a look at the draft and he's like, I don't even know if we should publish this, honestly. Oh, wow. I need to see better from you. And he's like, this isn't good. He was direct, but he was honest and he was kind. It was the kind of, I don't think this is ready. I don't think we should move ahead with this. Here's what I need from you. And that must have been a very tough thing for him to say to someone who'd been working on something for so long, but he said it in such a kind way that only he can do, that I still wish I could emulate that. But he did it in such a kind way. But the reason it worked was that he told me what I had to do. It was the first time that I actually had the guidance that I needed to do it. And so I just went home. I fixed up the couple of chapters that he looked at, and he's like, this is great. We're on the right track. But that's the thing is you're an author. You're not supposed to do it on your own. And I think there are a lot of situations where people, they go, I got the idea. I'll just write this. I'll just write it. I'm going to self-publish. I don't need someone to help me with this. And I'm not one of those people. I won't say that somebody shouldn't self-publish, but I will say that you owe it to yourself to find yourself at least a really good developmental editor to guide you through that process if it's your first time writing a book. Even if it's someone you got to find as a freelancer and give them a 20% royalty cut or something like that.
Yeah,
it's worth it. It is worth it to have a trained person in that role for your first book, because you'll learn so much. And if they're a really good developmental editor like Daniel, Daniel went on to pursue other things also, and I met another editor. I met Susanna Falzer, another phenomenal, just a expert in editing, just an expert editor. Those two voices are in my head at all times when I'm writing. All these years later, They're living rent free inside my head. They're guiding every decision that I make about what I'm going to put where. Did I explain that properly? That's there. And when I'm working with authors now, I'm doing the same thing that I was talking about before. I'm passing that knowledge. I'm paying that forward. I'm amplifying what Susanna and Daniel did for me. I'm amplifying that and spreading that to a new generation of authors.
So you get to HTML5 and CSS3, much easier, no surprises. At that point, you're like, I got this. It's a
much easier. The only surprises in that one was that there was just stuff that was kind of still changing. There was,
on the technology.
Tech was kind of in flux.
Yeah.
But that book went a lot faster, and that book sold really well, and I was really happy with that one. I was very happy. It's probably as a surprise that it did what it did, but it was just one of those things where it was just the right timing. We managed to get the book out at just the right time. And Daniel helped me with the first couple of chapters, and then Susanna took over the book, and I feel we just knocked it out of the park. And I continue to work with Susanna as sort of my partner in crime on all the other books.
At this point, you've written a lot of books. You're getting nearly done with another book. Do you find this many books in? This is, by my count, that is not including the first one where you just did, where you included the chapter. You have 10, I believe, that are published, with an 11th on the way, which is an incredible number of books. Still, is there something that can surprise you as an author 10 books later as you're writing? And if not surprise, is there anything that you still find challenging? Or at this point, does the process just kind of seem so natural that, no, it just flows right from your head, on the screen?
It never seems natural. I got the process, but what you're still doing is you're not writing the book for you. Like, I don't write a book for me. I write a book for, I want to teach somebody how to do something. And I spent a lot of time studying what that means. What does it mean to teach someone? And you have to have the right motivation. The project they're working on has to motivate them. It can't be trivial things like X and Y and foo and bar. I don't believe they're good examples. I want real world examples. So if I'm going to show you how to use the awk command, like we did in the Small Sharp Software Tools book, I'm not going to have you pick out parts of a string like hello world and then pick it apart. So what's the exercise I'm going to craft? And what that means is I'm going to start from the end. What are the things I want you to learn? So I write a list of what I want them to learn. Then what do I have to do to get them there? What do I have to do? Working backwards from that. And out of that comes the exercise or the thing we're going to do. So in the case of awk, it's a CSV file with a bunch of records about the U.S. House of Representatives that you can get from the census data. And so you can use, in the example, we're using awk to actually work with the data and show you don't need other tools to say, let's sum up all the representatives from the most populous states, or let's determine what are the 3 least populous states. Those are more real world things that you can connect to previous knowledge. Things like foo and bar and X and Y, they're abstract. And what I've discovered is about half of the population can work in the abstract and the other half can't. And I'm in the half that can't. I'm in the half that really struggle. I really struggle when I'm sitting in a CS class when we're talking about things at a theoretical level. I need to know why I should care and how this applies right now. And so sometimes you've got this list of things that you need to include. This is the things that people need to know. But you still have to justify why they need to know it. And that's the part that's always surprising. Because sometimes the surprise is, no, they actually don't need to know that. That doesn't belong in the book. It doesn't, no matter how much you love it, it doesn't belong here. No matter how much you think it belongs here, it doesn't belong here. And that surprises me on every single book. There's something that I fervently believe that this needs to be in the book. People need to know this. It's a vital part of their job, but I can't come up with a real justification. And that's an indication that that's a bias creeping in, or I just really like it. I'm really excited about it. And so it often ends up getting cut. There are a few things. There are a few things that are ending up in videos and tutorials on the Small Sharp Software Tools website that just weren't a good fit for the book, and so I'm just doing them as supplemental material.
When you're sitting down to write the book, you have to be an expert in the technology and the subject matter first to be able to say, here's where I want to take people? Or is that a process in and of itself? As the author, are you also becoming more of an expert in the technology?
No, you don't have to be an expert, but you do have to care. You have to care about the results of the of your impact on other people. What are they going to learn from this book, and how are you going to guide them there? If you're writing a book just to write a book to get your name out there and all that, that's not a good way to go about it. I'm not going to say it's not the right way. I'm saying it's not a good way to go about it, because it won't come through in the end result, in the delivery. Nobody knows 100% of the technology they're writing about. Everybody I've talked to, every book that I've edited, everybody that I've talked to says they come out of the book writing process an expert.
Mm-hmm.
Because so much of the time is not writing the book. So much of the time is researching the book and dissecting what you think you know. Because when you're writing learning materials, you have to make concessions. You can't do things the production way, because the production way often involves things you can't explain to people at a certain level yet. They need the experience level to get there. So you end up doing things that, from a coding standpoint, are less optimal. You're doing this because you want to show something, not necessarily someone should use this code in production. And then of course that then gets this doubt in your mind, like, oh, is someone going to point that out and say that I don't know what I'm talking about? Well, the answer is yes. But yes, they will, and they're just trolling you. But the reality is, if you go in with the mindset that you think you have to know everything, then that's going to hurt you a lot more when it happens. So if you go in the mindset of I'm a guide, I am one of many voices out there teaching you how to do something. I'm excited about this thing. I want to guide you using my experience. And if that works for you as a reader, that's great. I'm glad that works for you as a reader. And there are many other books out there that will give you a second thing. I don't know too many people that just learn something from just one source either. So if you're an author, you don't have to know it all. What sticks out in my mind is, when I started teaching, there were classes that I got thrown into that I didn't know all of the subject matter that I was teaching. I had to sub in for a class one semester, and there was a unit in there on 3D modeling with 3D Studio Max. I had never done that ever, but there was a lesson plan, and I studied and learned it, and I was able to pull it off. But the craft of a writer who's writing educational material, their skill isn't the tech. Their skill is being the writer and explaining the things in a way that people can understand. So my teaching mentor had this wonderful phrase that she would always keep in mind, and she got it from her teaching mentor, and it's, you should be the guide on the side, not the sage on the stage. You're there to guide the learner. You're not there to be the keeper of all the knowledge, but you're there to guide them through the learning process. That's what an author does. That's what a book does. That's what a video should do. You're not standing up there with the wizard hat on, waving and saying, look at me, look at how cool I am. People don't respond to that. People respond to, I'm going to help you get better at this thing. I'm going to help you get, this is about you, the reader, not about me, the author. So you're there to be their guide. You don't have to know everything. You'll learn it with them. Yeah. And this holds true if you're in a working relationship too. Let's figure this out together. Those kinds of things. It's not just for writing. It's for a working relationship.
A lot of first-time authors, they have expectations about what they think they're going to personally get out of writing a book. So what would you say for you is the personally most rewarding thing about writing books?
Seeing other people share what they've learned from the books. That's personally rewarding to me, because I know that I've made an impact on somebody's life. I've made an impact on somebody's work. I've helped them do their work better. The actual benefits from writing a book really come down to, okay, if you got a bestseller in your hand, you can make some money. That's a nice source of passive income. You'll be regarded as somebody who knows what they're talking about. That will lead to speaking opportunities. That will lead to conference opportunities. That will lead to jobs. I wrote the book on that thing. That will lead to that. I've seen that so many times. Not just me, but I got my teaching job because I had written some books. Before that, I was working at a university, but I wasn't in an instructional capacity. I had interns. But I had written several books, and I was very easy for me to walk in and say, I'd like to teach. And it was, well, you clearly can. Um, and because part of people don't always realize this, but part of teaching is writing the curriculum for the classes, creating the lesson plans. It's essentially as much work as writing a book to create a course. To create a course with a 64 to 128 instructional hours is, you have to develop the assessments, you have to develop the presentation materials, you have to develop the homework, you have to grade the assignments. So, but a good portion of that is content creation. It's just the delivery method is a little different. So that's a benefit. It opens the doors for opportunities. You're perceived as the expert in a certain area, but the other intangible benefits is just the connections that you can make with people. When I was teaching, I taught introduction to programming class, and in that class I had every class period I would give the students I would write up a programming problem on the whiteboard, and the students would break off into groups and they would work on that programming problem for an hour or so, and then we'd come back together and they'd share their solutions. And after teaching class for several years, I had the collection of those programs, and I took them with me, and I put them together in the exercises for programmers book. And I sort of thought that nobody would really care too much about it, but I wanted it because I just wanted to be able to have it and give it to people, because I believe in it. I would use those same exercises that I gave my students. I would use those to learn new languages. While they were learning something, while they were learning JavaScript, that was the language we used in the class. While they were learning JavaScript, I would learn a new language with them, something that I didn't know. So one semester I learned Elixir, and I would use some portions at the end of the class period to sort of give the students an update on my learning progression. Here's the problem that you just solved in JavaScript. I actually went through and did that one in Elixir, and here's what it looks like, and here's what I learned from that. Just sort of put myself in the learner's mindset. What are they going through? I'm going through the same kind of thing as I'm trying to acquire a new skill. But the book is inspiring people. It's fun to see the GitHub repositories of people's solutions. It's fun to see people say, to cheerlead that book for me on social media. It's fun when they email me and say, I learned Go for this job, and thank you for writing that book. It was really helpful. It wasn't, I didn't write that book for any other purpose than I wanted it to exist and so that it could help people. And I was surprised at how well it took off. So yeah. The motivation can vary by books too. The book that I wrote on Grunt, for example, I actually wrote that first draft in 2 weeks out of anger because I was working on a consulting project. We were using Grunt on the project to do the JavaScript automation stuff. And there was no documentation that I could find. And the official Grunt documentation was lacking at the time. And before I could submit my first draft of that book to Prags, I had to scan it for profanity and things like that because it was such a profanity-laden draft. Maybe someday I'll release the original profanity-laden draft of that book. But that was written out of anger because these docs are not great, and they're not. I can certainly fix the docs in terms of contributing back in an open source way, but the kinds of contributions I want to do, I don't want to document the thing. I want to show the real world use cases for it. So it's different. It's like you say, well, why don't you just contribute back to the master docs? Because the docs aren't set up to be that. The docs are meant for reference, and I don't write reference material. I want to connect things to these real world scenarios. And so I had the real world scenario, the consulting thing that I was doing at the time, and I had the opportunity. So I just threw the thing together, and I was going to self-publish it, and I just threw it at PragProg. Just like, what do you think? You want to publish this? And they're like, yeah, sure, why not? I think it's easier if you come with a completed book, come with an idea for a completed book. But again, that was really short. That was like less than 100 pages, and again, it was just pure rage fueled stuff. But that's the thing. That's the motivations are always different. I wrote the book on Tmux, and I'd written the book on Grunt, and I was writing all these books that required command line tools, and I had taught this class on command line tools where I taught. And what always occurred to me is there isn't a book out there that I would want to point people at to learn the CLI stuff. I wrote all this curriculum. Why don't I just turn that into a book? And that's where the small sharp software tools came. It's I want this thing to exist so that when I do the next edition of the TMUX book, I can say you can use this book as a jumping off point to get comfortable with the CLI. That's why that book exists. It's again like what needs to be out there. What do I, opinionated Brian, think needs to be out there? And if I'm wrong, the book sales will tell me that I'm wrong.
You are an author, you're an editor, you're a manager at a tech company, you're a software developer, a public speaker, you're a musician. People might not know that. And there's probably even more stuff that I'm leaving out that you do that I don't even know. What do you think is the relationship between all these different things you do and then being an author?
Being an author is part of my desire to be a teacher. Even when I wasn't a formal educator, I was still using what I knew and passing it on to other people who were working with me. My parents are both educators as well, and so this kind of just runs in the family. I learned a thing, I want to teach it to something else. So it's something that drives me, that I think this thing is really cool and I want to show it to you. And that's kind of how I operate in a general sense. And so things like with the books, it's who's going to write this? Is it going to be me, or is it going to be somebody else? Maybe it's somebody else needs to write this book. I spent a long time looking for somebody to write a book on making command line applications with Go, for example. And that's out in beta now. I'm editing that book, and the author on that book is a wonderful, wonderful human being who has that same passion. Like this needs to exist, and I'm really excited to show people how to do this. And I think it's going to go really well. I think that all these things for me just feed into each other. I'm a better teacher because I've gone through the process of learning how to teach through writing. I'm a better writer now than I was in the beginning because of my experience in the classroom. I'm a better software developer because of feedback I've received from my writing and my teaching and in pull requests. It's just sort of this interconnected loop of things. And as far as the music thing goes, that's just it's a creative outlet. It's another way of expressing creativity, whether I'm expressing creativity in music or I'm expressing creativity in the writing that I do or the teaching that I do. It's just all feeds into itself.
So lastly, you've been publishing with us for a very, very long time. And of course, that makes us extremely happy. It's fantastic working with you. At this point, though, you could easily go to any publisher and they'd all welcome you with open arms. So my question is, why do you keep choosing to write with Pragmatic?
This is going to sound super, super biased because I am a development editor at Pragmatic Bookshelf. When I'm not writing books, I am editing books for other authors. And I'm thrilled that Prags has kept me around as a DE for so long, which is awesome. And I get a chance to do that kind of stuff. But I think that the developmental editors that Pragmatic Bookshelf has are the best in the industry. They are just the best. And the DE that I work with on a book is a partner, a sounding board. I don't think you get that from other places. I've heard stories where there's not a close working relationship between the author and the editor. And I could probably even self-publish, but I don't want to. The benefit that I get from working with the DEs and the production people and all the other things the benefits they're so worth it, because they'll help me deliver a book faster, and it will be of much better quality because there's somebody sitting there driving the project forward. There's somebody giving me honest feedback on this, saying, you know what, I don't think you're approaching this the right way. I think you can get a little too big for your britches, if I can borrow that. I've done this so many times. I'm an expert in this. I don't think you're ever too good at something to get honest feedback on it and get better at it. And that's the thing is, I have seen folks say, well, I don't want to, I'm just going to self-publish. And, because sometimes they'll see a publisher as maybe a gatekeeper. They'll see an editor as a gatekeeper. And, an editor's job isn't to gatekeep you. An editor's job is to make your voice even better. It's to help you reach even more readers. You want to reach readers. You want to reach a wide audience, and an editor can help you do that, and a publisher can help you do that. And so I keep coming back because these are people that I trust. These are people that I know are going to help me deliver the best possible product I can deliver.
Well, I know that your editors love working with you. You make the job easy for them. You have your new book coming out, and we hope you write another 10 with us.